What is the price of a seat? For one family, it was their dignity. For a prestigious airline, it was millions of dollars and a reputation left in tatters. This isn't just a story about a conflict at 30,000 feet. It's the story of Dr. Marcus and Amelia Henderson, a successful black couple who bought business-class tickets to Paris, only to be met with a venomous bigotry that tried to cast them out. They were told their presence was a problem. They were deplaned, humiliated. Their daughter's dream vacation turned into a nightmare. But what the arrogant passenger and the complicit airline didn't know was that the Hendersons wouldn't just walk away. They would fight back, and their fight would expose a rotten corporate culture and deliver a dose of karma so severe it would dismantle an empire. This is what happens when injustice meets an unbreakable will. The air in the John F. Kennedy International Airport Terminal hummed with a unique kind of energy. A symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the palpable thrum of 1,000 different journeys beginning at once. For the Henderson family, this symphony was the overture to a long-awaited masterpiece. Dr. Marcus Henderson, a man whose hands, steady and precise, had mended hundreds of hearts in the operating theatre, now held his 10-year-old daughter Chloe's hand with a gentle firmness. His smile, usually reserved and thoughtful, was broad and uninhibited. Beside him, Amelia Henderson, an architect whose designs fused glass and steel into structures that seemed to defy gravity, adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the bustling concourse not for structural flaws, but with the simple, unadulterated joy of a mother about to share a magical experience with her family. This trip was more than a vacation. It was a coronation of sorts. Marcus had recently been awarded the prestigious Jonathan C. White Prize for innovation in cardiothoracic surgery, a monumental achievement that had cemented his reputation as one of the leading surgeons in the country. The prize came with a significant honorarium, and after a brief discussion, they had decided exactly how to use it, a no-expense-spared 2-week trip to Paris. For Chloe, Paris was a city woven from the threads of her favorite storybooks and animated films. It was a place of towering iron ladies' museums, filled with stolen smiles and pastries that tasted of clouds and sugar. She clutched a well-worn copy of Madeline in her free hand, her bright, intelligent eyes burning with an excitement that seemed almost too large for her small frame. She had spent months practicing her French with an app on her tablet, and her bonjour and merci were delivered with a charming, earnest precision. Their journey began as all luxurious adventures should, at the Global Voyager Airlines flagship lounge. The hushed atmosphere was a world away from the terminal's chaotic energy. Here the lighting was soft, the armchairs were plush leather, and the air smelled faintly of sandalwood and brewing coffee. Marcus, Amelia, and Chloe were treated with the deferential courtesy reserved for the airline's most valued customers. A cheerful attendant with a bright smile checked their documents, her fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard. The Henderson family headed to Charles de Gaulle, she confirmed, her voice warm. Seats 2A, 2B, and 2C in our Polaris business class. We are so delighted to have you fly with us today. Dr. Henderson, congratulations again on your award. It was in the Alumni magazine. Marcus offered a modest smile. Thank you. We're very much looking forward to it. They settled into a quiet corner of the lounge. Amelia sipped a glass of champagne, its crisp effervescence a perfect match for her mood. Marcus enjoyed a coffee, while Chloe was treated to a fancy hot chocolate, complete with a mountain of whipped cream and a delicate chocolate straw. They spoke in low, happy tones, mapping out their Parisian itinerary, a visit to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. A boat tour on the Seine, a climb up the Eiffel Tower at dusk, and a day trip to the Palace of Versailles. They were a portrait of success, a family whose intelligence, hard work, and dedication had afforded them a life of comfort and opportunity. They were the American dream rendered in flesh and blood. The boarding call for flight GV-112 to Paris came softly like a polite suggestion rather than a command. They gathered their belongings and made their way to the gate joining the priority queue. As they walked down the jet bridge, the massive Rolls-Royce engine of the Boeing 707 visible through the window, the sense of adventure intensified. The aircraft was their chariot, poised to carry them across the ocean to a city of dreams. Stepping inside, they were greeted by the senior flight purser, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that seemed permanently affixed. "Welcome aboard, Dr. and Mrs. Henderson. Right this way." She led them through the serene, spacious business class cabin. The pods were arranged in a herringbone pattern, each one a private cocoon of leather and polished chrome. It was the pinnacle of commercial air travel designed for ultimate comfort and privacy. Their seats 2A, 2B, and 2C were a cluster of 3 by the window. Chloe gasped with delight as she spotted the amenity kit from a luxury French brand and the large screen entertainment system. She immediately claimed the window seat, pressing her face against the cool plexiglass to watch the ground crew scurry below. Amelia settled into the middle seat, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment. Marcus took the aisle seat 2C. He stretched his long legs, a sigh of contentment escaping his lips. Everything was perfect. The pre-departure drinks were offered more champagne for Amelia, sparkling water for Marcus, and an orange juice for Chloe. The cabin slowly filled with the quiet murmur of other passengers, finding their seats, the soft click of overhead bins, and the gentle rustle of coats being stowed away. The air was filled with a sense of calm and anticipation. The Hendersons were precisely where they were supposed to be, in the seats they had earned and paid for, at the start of a journey that was meant to be the highlight of their year. They were blissfully, tragically unaware that their perfect overture was about to be interrupted by a discordant, jarring note of pure malice. They didn't see the man who was making his way down the aisle, his face a mask of sour entitlement. They didn't know that their golden ticket was about to be challenged, and their dream was on the verge of becoming a waking nightmare. The man who stopped at seat 2D was Richard Harrington. Everything about him screamed wealth, but the old, quiet kind. His suit was Savile Row, his watch was a Patek Philippe, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and a patrician face that seemed perpetually locked in a state of mild disapproval. He was a man accustomed to the world arranging itself to his liking. As the head of Harrington Capital, a boutique hedge fund that managed billions, he moved through life with the unshakable conviction that his comfort and convenience were paramount. He placed his briefcase in the overhead bin with a precise, deliberate motion before turning his attention to his seat. It was then that he seemed to truly notice the Hendersons for the first time. His gaze swept over them, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in his pale blue eyes. He looked at Marcus, then Amelia, and finally at Chloe, who was now engrossed in the animated safety video. His lip curled ever so slightly. He flagged down a passing flight attendant, a young woman named Brenda. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "There seems to be a mistake." Brenda stopped her customer service smile firmly in place. "Sir, how can I help you?" Harrington gestured vaguely towards the Hendersons. I'm in seat 2D. I believe there's been a seating error. I'd like to be moved. Brenda glanced at her tablet. I'm showing you are confirmed in 2D, Mr. Harrington. Is there a problem with the seat itself? I can have maintenance take a look. The seat is fine, Harrington replied, his voice dripping with condescension. This arrangement is the problem. I paid a premium for a comfortable, quiet flight. I did not pay to be seated with them. He didn't say the word, but his meaning hung in the air thick and poisonous. Marcus and Amelia, who had been speaking softly to each other, fell silent. They turned to look at Harrington, a slow, dawning realization on their faces. It was a look they had seen before, a subtle but unmistakable brand of prejudice that could curdle a perfect moment into something sour and ugly. Brenda, the young flight attendant, was clearly out of her depth. She stammered, I'm not sure I understand, sir. This is the assigned seating. Then unassign it, Harrington snapped his voice, growing louder, drawing the attention of other passengers. I have a right to a peaceful journey. I will not sit here. Marcus, ever the calm professional, decided to intervene. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood extending a hand. I'm Dr. Marcus Henderson, he said, his voice even and steady, betraying none of the anger coiling in his stomach. This is my wife Amelia and our daughter Chloe. I think there may be a misunderstanding. Harrington looked at Marcus's outstretched hand as if it were something unclean. He didn't take it. There is no misunderstanding, he sneered. I simply have my preferences, and my preference is to not be in this section. The coded language was gone, replaced by a raw, naked bigotry. Amelia's face hardened. She was not a man of medicine trained to remain detached. She was an architect used to dealing with contractors and zoning boards, and she did not suffer fools. Your preference, she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. What exactly is your preference, Mr. Harrington? That people who look like us shouldn't be in business class. The accusation hung in the air. Harrington's face flushed a blotchy red. I'm not going to be lectured by you. I am a million-mile flyer with this airline. I expect a certain level of service, and that service includes not being subjected to potential disturbances. He glanced pointedly at Chloe, who had turned from the screen, her eyes wide with confusion, sensing the palpable tension. The situation was escalating. Brenda, the flustered flight attendant, scurried off to get the senior purser, Susan. When Susan arrived, she assessed the situation with a practiced but weary eye. She saw a flustered black family and an irate, obviously wealthy white man. Her corporate training kicked in, and it dictated the path of least resistance, appease the high-value customer. Miss Harrington, I do apologize for any discomfort, Susan said, her voice smooth as silk. She completely ignored the Hendersons. Let me see if we can find you another seat. Amelia was incredulous. Excuse me. He is the one causing the problem. He is the one making racist insinuations, and you're offering to move him. Susan finally turned to Amelia, her smile tight and artificial. Ma'am, I'm just trying to resolve the situation so we can depart on time. Then resolve it by telling this man to sit in the seat he was assigned or get off the plane, Marcus said, his voice now steely. We are not the problem here. But Susan was already speaking into her wrist-worn communication device, looking for an open seat for Harrington. He stood by, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant look on his face. The message was clear. His comfort was the priority. Their dignity was expendable. Just then another passenger, a man in his 40s named Thomas, who was seated across the aisle, spoke up. This is outrageous, he said, his voice clear and firm. I heard the whole thing. This man is refusing to sit next to this family because they're black. and you're rewarding him for it. You should be ashamed." Susan shot him a withering look, but a few other passengers murmured in agreement. The conflict was no longer a private matter. It was a public spectacle of prejudice. Finding no other available seats in business class, Susan returned with a new, deeply insulting proposal. She leaned in and spoke to Marcus in a conspiratorial whisper. "Dr. Henderson, I understand this is upsetting. As a gesture of goodwill, we would be happy to move your family to our premium economy section. We'll offer you 3 seats together there, and of course we'll refund the fare difference and give you some travel vouchers for the inconvenience." Marcus stared at her as if she had sprouted a second head. The sheer audacity of the offer was breathtaking. They were being asked to accept a downgrade, to move from the seats they had paid thousands for, to accommodate a bigot. It was a punishment for being the victims of his prejudice. "Absolutely not," Amelia said, her voice like ice. "We are not moving. We are not accepting a downgrade. We are staying right here." The standoff was absolute. Harrington refused to sit. The Hendersons refused to move. And the airline staff, instead of ejecting the disruptive passenger, were treating the victims as the source of the problem. Finally, Susan made a decision. She spoke into her device again. "I need the captain at the gate, please. We have a passenger dispute that is preventing departure." Captain Miller, a veteran pilot with a weathered face and an air of weary authority, arrived a few minutes later. He was briefed by Susan, his expression growing more grim with each word. He listened to her one-sided account, which painted the Hendersons as being uncooperative in resolving the seating issue. He approached Marcus. "Sir." He began, his tone brooking no argument. "I am responsible for the safety and security of this flight. This situation is causing a delay and a disturbance. I need you and your family to deplane so we can sort this out on the ground." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You're kicking us off the plane?" Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "He's the one who started this. He's the one refusing to take his seat." "I'm not debating this," the captain said, his face a granite mask. "Ground staff is waiting at the door. Please gather your belongings." There was no choice. To refuse would be to risk arrest. Humiliated, their hearts heavy with a pain that was far deeper than a missed vacation. Marcus and Amelia gathered their bags. Chloe, now openly crying, clutched her Madeleine book to her chest. As they walked down the aisle, in a fog of shame and anger, they could feel the eyes of the other passengers on them. Some looked away embarrassed. Others, like Thomas, looked on with undisguised disgust at the injustice. As they reached the door, Marcus turned for one last look. He saw Richard Harrington being attended to by a flight attendant who was offering him a glass of champagne. He was settling into his seat, 2D the victor. The Hendersons were escorted off the plane and back onto the jet bridge, which now felt like a walk of shame. The heavy door of the aircraft sealed shut behind them with a final deafening thud, severing them from their dream, leaving them stranded in the cold, impersonal terminal, their golden ticket turned to ash. The sterile, impersonal environment of the airport terminal did little to soothe the raw, gaping wound of their humiliation. They were led to a small, windowless office near the customer service desk, a beige box that felt more like an interrogation room than a place of assistance. A global Voyager gate agent, a man with a tired expression and a name tag that read Gary, offered them water bottles with a practiced, dispassionate sympathy. "We've rebooked you on a flight tomorrow morning," Gary announced, avoiding eye contact. "We can arrange a hotel voucher for you for the night." The words barely registered. Amelia was pacing the small room like a caged tigress, her hands clenched into fists. Marcus sat heavily in a plastic chair, His arm wrapped around Chloe, who was sobbing quietly into his chest. Her small body shook with tremors of confusion and hurt. The magic of Paris, of the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, had been brutally extinguished, replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of this soul-crushing room. A hotel voucher. Amelia's voice was dangerously low. You kick us off a flight because a racist didn't want to sit near us, and you think a hotel voucher makes it right. You humiliate my family. You ruin our vacations, you traumatize our daughter, and you offer us a voucher. Gary flinched. Ma'am, I'm just following procedure. The captain made the final call based on the purser's report of a disturbance. We were the disturbance, Marcus interjected, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. We were sitting quietly in our paid-for seats. A man expressed his bigotry, your staff validated it, and we were the disturbance. Is that the official position of Global Voyager Airlines? Gary had no answer. He simply pushed the vouchers across the desk, a silent, inadequate offering. It was a moment of profound helplessness for the Hendersons. They were up against a faceless, monolithic corporation that had already passed its judgment. They had been deemed the problem, their experience erased and reframed as an unfortunate seating dispute. They left the office and found a deserted gate area to sit down and collect their thoughts. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. Chloe had cried herself to sleep in Marcus's lap, her face tear-streaked even in repose. "We can't let them do this, Mark," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We can't let them get away with this. Not just for us, for Chloe. I don't want her growing up in a world where this is okay, where someone can treat her like that and face no consequences." Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter, at the innocence that had been so cruelly bruised that evening. He felt a surge of protective fury that eclipsed his own pain. He was a healer, a man who fixed things. And this grotesque injustice was something that needed fixing. "You're right," he said, his resolve hardening. "They're not going to sweep this under the rug." Amelia pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. There was only one person she could think of to call, a name from her past at Columbia Law, a woman who had been a firebrand even then, who had always run toward the fights others ran away from. The phone rang twice before a voice, sharp and energetic, answered. "Evelyn Reed. It's Amelia Henderson." There was a brief pause, then a warm rush of recognition. "Amy. My God, it's been years. How are you? I saw that Marcus won the white prize. That's incredible. Tell him I said congratulations." The mention of the award, the very reason for their trip, brought a fresh wave of pain. Amelia's voice broke. We're not okay. Something terrible just happened." Over the next 20 minutes, haltingly at first, then with a rising tide of anger, Amelia recounted the entire sordid affair. She told Evelyn everything: the smug entitlement of Richard Harrington, the fumbling inadequacy of the flight attendants, the offer of a downgrade, and the final crushing humiliation of being deplaned by the captain. On the other end of the line, in her sleek Chicago office overlooking the river, Evelyn Reed listened in silence. She leaned back in her chair, her pen tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on her legal pad. Evelyn was a force of nature. As a civil rights attorney, she had taken on police departments, multinational corporations, and government agencies. She had a reputation for being meticulous, relentless, and utterly fearless. As she listened to Amelia's story, her professional calm gave way to a cold, simmering rage. This wasn't just a case of poor customer service. This was a textbook example of flying while black, a distillation of the 1,000 subtle and overt indignities that people of color often faced. The complicity of the airline, their choice to coddle the aggressor and punish the victim, was what elevated it from a personal insult to a systemic failure that had to be challenged. "Amy, listen to me," Evelyn said when Amelia had finished, her voice now devoid of its earlier warmth, replaced by a focused intensity. "Don't talk to anyone else from the airline. Don't accept any more vouchers. Don't sign anything. Where are you now?" "We're still at JFK, gate C28. "Stay there. I'm booking the next flight to New York. I'll be there in a few hours." Amelia was taken aback. "Evelyn, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do." Evelyn cut her off. "This isn't just an airline dispute, Amy. This is a civil rights violation. They didn't just deny you a service you paid for. They publicly humiliated you and your family based on your race. They made your daughter cry. I'm not letting that stand." There was a fierce protective loyalty in Evelyn's voice that brought tears to Amelia's eyes. This time, tears of gratitude. For the first time since they had stepped onto that plane, she felt a flicker of hope. They were no longer alone. "What about that man?" Amelia asked. "The passenger who stood up for us. Did you get his name?" Evelyn asked, her mind already working, piecing together the strategy. "Thomas. I think his last name was Sterling. He was in seat 3D. "Good," Evelyn said. "That's good. He's a witness. We're going to need him." She paused. "And Mr. Richard Harrington of seat 2D. Don't you worry about him. By the time I'm done, he's going to wish he'd been on a different continent tonight." The call ended. Amelia looked at Marcus, relaying the conversation. A weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. They were no longer just victims. They were about to become litigants. The power dynamic had shifted. 4 hours later, as the first hints of dawn streaked the New York sky, a taxi pulled up to the arrival's curb. Evelyn Reed stepped out. She was dressed in a sharp, practical pantsuit, a briefcase in one hand. She walked into the terminal with a purposeful stride, her eyes scanning the sparse, pre-dawn crowd until she saw them. She embraced Amelia, a long, heartfelt hug that spoke of years of friendship. She shook Marcus's hand firmly, her eyes conveying a depth of empathy and steely resolve. Then she knelt down to Chloe, who was now awake, curled up against her mother. "Hi, Chloe," Evelyn said gently. "My name is Evelyn. I'm a friend of your mum's. I know you've had a really bad night, but I'm going to help make it right. I promise." In that quiet, deserted corner of the airport, under the unwavering gaze of their new champion, the battle for justice for the Henderson family had officially begun. The call had been made, and the cavalry had arrived. The corporate headquarters of Global Voyager Airlines was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Dallas, a monument to the company's century-long dominance in the aviation industry. Inside, the legal department occupied the top 3 floors, a realm of polished mahogany, hushed tones, and lawyers who billed at over $1,000 an hour. It was here that the first letter from Evelyn Reed, attorney at law, landed like a perfectly targeted missile. The letter was not a polite inquiry. It was a formal notice of impending legal action, detailing claims of racial discrimination, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It named the airline Captain Miller Susan, the purser, and John Doe, flight attendants. It was precise, aggressive, and it demanded a response within 10 business days. The initial reaction within Global Voyager's legal team, led by their formidable General Counsel Harrison Croft, was one of dismissal. They dealt with dozens of customer complaints a day. This one seemed noisy, but not substantially different. Their standard operating procedure was to stonewall delay and eventually offer a settlement of travel vouchers and a non-disclosure agreement. They viewed it as a public relations nuisance, not a genuine legal threat. They were wrong. Evelyn Reed did not operate by standard procedure. While the corporate lawyers were drafting a condescending response, Evelyn was building her arsenal. She hired a private investigator, who within 48 hours had identified and located Thomas Sterling, the passenger who had spoken up for the Hendersons. Thomas, a software engineer from Boston, was still incandescent with rage over what he had witnessed. He readily agreed to provide a sworn affidavit, his account a damning objective corroboration of the Henderson story. "It was the most blatant act of racism I've ever witnessed firsthand," he told Evelyn over a video call, "and the airline crew were worse than useless. They were complicit. They sided with the bigot." But Evelyn didn't stop there. She knew that in the modern world, every public space was a potential film set. She put out a quiet call on social media using targeted ads aimed at people who had been on flight GV112. "Were you on the flight from JFK to Paris that was delayed on September the 12th? Did you witness a family being unjustly removed, civil rights attorney seeking information?" The trickle of responses soon became a flood. It turned out several passengers had discreetly filmed the confrontation. A short, grainy video emerged, shot from a few rows back. It captured Harrington's sneering refusal to sit, Amelia's pointed questioning, and Susan the purser's fawning attempts to placate Harrington. Another clip, even more damning, captured Captain Miller's curt dismissive order for the Hendersons to deplane. The audio was clear. The injustice was undeniable. Evelyn held a press conference. Standing beside Marcus and Amelia, who maintained a dignified, composed silence, Evelyn laid out the facts. She didn't grandstand or use inflammatory rhetoric. She simply told the story, her voice calm and measured, letting the ugliness of the facts speak for themselves. Then she played the videos for the assembled media. The story exploded. It was picked up by national news outlets, cable networks, and went viral on every social media platform. The hashtags flying, while Black and Hard Boycott Global Voyager began trending worldwide. The court of public opinion was now in session, and the verdict was swift and brutal. Global Voyager's carefully crafted image of sophisticated inclusive service was shattered. Their initial public statement, a bland mishmash of corporate speak about reviewing the incident and being committed to diversity, was met with widespread ridicule and fury. Their stock price, which had been on a steady incline, took a noticeable dip. Inside the Dallas skyscraper, the mood shifted from dismissal to panic. Harrison Croft and the executive team had grossly underestimated Evelyn Reed and the power of the Henderson story. They were no longer dealing with a nuisance. They were in a full-blown corporate crisis. Their legal strategy pivoted from stonewalling to aggressive defense. They hired an outside law firm, the notoriously ruthless firm of Sterling, Cromwell and Finch, to handle the case. The first order of business was to attack the victims. In legal filings, they attempted to paint the Hendersons as belligerent and confrontational, suggesting they were the ones who had escalated the situation, that their aggressive response to a simple seating request had forced the captain's hand. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was a brutal war of attrition. The airline's lawyers filed hundreds of motions, buried Evelyn in paperwork, and scheduled grueling day-long depositions. They were trying to exhaust the Hendersons, to bleed them dry, emotionally and financially, hoping they would accept a low-ball settlement just to make it stop. They didn't know the Hendersons, and they certainly didn't know Evelyn Reed. The deposition of Richard Harrington was a masterclass in arrogance. He sat in the conference room of Evelyn's Chicago firm, flanked by 2 expensive lawyers, and oozed contempt. He denied everything. He claimed he had simply requested a different seat due to a feeling of discomfort. Evelyn, calm and methodical, led him down a path of his own making. "Mr. Harrington, you're the founder of Harrington Capital, correct?" "That's right." "A very successful hedge fund. You're a man who is used to getting what he wants." "I'm a man who works hard," he corrected. "And on flight GV-112 you wanted a different seat. Why?" "As I said, I was uncomfortable with the seating arrangement." "What about it made you uncomfortable?" Evelyn pressed her voice soft. "Was the seat too small? Was it a mechanical issue?" "No. It was the proximity," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The proximity to what? The window, the aisle, the proximity to the other passengers." "You mean the Henderson family?" "Yes." "And what about the Henderson family made you uncomfortable, Mr. Harrington? Was it Dr. Henderson's profession as a heart surgeon, Mrs. Henderson's work as an architect, or was it their 10-year-old daughter?" Harrington's lawyer interjected. "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness." Evelyn ignored him. "Was it perhaps the color of their skin?" "Mr. Harrington," he sneered. "That's absurd. I am not a racist." Evelyn paused, letting the silence hang in the room. Then she pushed a tablet across the table. "I'd like to play a short video for you." It was the passenger's footage. The audio was crystal clear. His voice filled with disdain. "I did not pay to be seated with them." His sneer at Marcus's outstretched hand. His demand to be moved. Harrington's face went pale. The color drained from his patrician features. He had been caught. The legal battlefield had just been tilted decisively in Evelyn Reed's favor. The airline's lawyers knew it. They had built their defense on the word of a man who had just been proven to be a liar, his bigotry captured for all the world to see. The war was far from over, but a crucial battle had just been won. The video of Richard Harrington's deposition, leaked to a prominent news organization, acted as an accelerant on an already raging fire. The sight of the wealthy financier lying under oath only to be confronted with his own recorded bigotry was a devastating blow to Global Voyager's case. Their strategy of painting him as a misunderstood customer and the Hendersons as aggressors was now laughable. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. Talk show hosts dissected the incident. Disability rights groups protested the airline's treatment of the Hendersons, and corporate clients began quietly reviewing their travel contracts with Global Voyager. The stock price, which had dipped, now began to slide in earnest, wiping hundreds of millions of dollars off the company's valuation. The crisis was no longer confined to the legal and PR departments. It was hitting the bottom line, the only language the board of directors truly understood. Inside the airline, the atmosphere was toxic. A culture of fear set in as executives hunted for a scapegoat. Captain Miller and Purser Susan were placed on indefinite paid leave, their careers effectively over. But the rank-and-file employees knew the problem ran much deeper. They knew that the customer is always right mantra had long been twisted into the wealthiest customer is always right. They had all seen instances where premium flyers were allowed to bend or break rules, while others were held to the strictest letter of the law. The Henderson incident was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable result of a corrosive corporate culture. Among them was a senior flight attendant named Claire Jenkins. Claire was a 25-year veteran of the airline, a woman who had once been proud to wear the Global Voyager uniform. She had been working in the first-class cabin on flight GV-112 that night, and while she wasn't directly involved in the confrontation, She had witnessed Susan's panicked deference to Harrington and the subsequent shameful removal of the Henderson family. The incident had left her feeling sick to her stomach. For weeks, Claire wrestled with her conscience. She saw the public statements from her company, the lies and distortions, and felt a growing sense of complicity. She read about the Hendersons, about Marcus's life-saving work, and their daughter Chloe, and the injustice became too much to bear. Her silence felt like a betrayal of her own values. After a sleepless night, she made a decision. Using a burner email account from a public library computer, she sent a message to the general contact form on Evelyn Reed's law firm website. It was short and to the point. Subject: Global Voyager Flight GV-112. I am a flight attendant with the airline. I was on that flight. The company is lying. There are internal documents that prove they have a history of prioritizing high-value customers over policy and basic decency. I can get them. I want to help. The email landed in Evelyn's inbox like a prayer answered. She knew that an inside source, a whistleblower, could be the key to breaking the case wide open. It would elevate the lawsuit from a single incident of discrimination to a pattern and practice of corporate malfeasance. She replied immediately, setting up a secure, encrypted line of communication. Over the next week, Claire became Evelyn's mole inside Global Voyager. Under the cloak of anonymity, she accessed and forwarded a treasure trove of incriminating documents. There were internal emails from executives stressing the importance of retaining concierge key and global services members, the airline's highest elite tiers which Harrington belonged to. One memo from a vice president of customer experience explicitly stated, in any dispute involving a GS member, the default position should be to de-escalate by accommodating their request, even if it requires inconvenience to other passengers. The most damning piece of evidence was a section from a confidential crew training manual titled Conflict Resolution at 30,000 Feet. It contained a flowchart for handling passenger disputes. For standard passengers, the protocol involved warnings and potential removal for non-compliance. But for high-value customers, the chart had a separate parallel path that focused entirely on appeasement, alternative solutions, and service recovery gestures. There was no mention of holding them accountable for their behavior. It was a corporate policy that created a two-tiered system of justice in the skies, one for the rich and another for everyone else. This was the smoking gun. Evelyn now had undeniable proof that the actions of the crew on flight GV-112 were not the result of a few bad apples making a poor judgment call. They were following a script, an unwritten but deeply embedded corporate doctrine that protected the privileged at the expense of the marginalized. The airline hadn't just failed the Hendersons. It had designed a system that was destined to fail them. Armed with this new evidence, Evelyn filed a motion to amend her lawsuit. She added a claim for punitive damages, arguing that the airline had acted with malice and reckless indifference to the Hendersons' civil rights. She attached copies of the internal emails and the training manual as exhibits. When Harrison Croft and the airline's outside counsel at Sterling, Cromwell and Finch received the amended filing, they knew the game was over. The documents were authentic and irrefutable. They had been caught not just in a lie, but in a systemic practice of discrimination. A jury would not just be sympathetic to the Hendersons, they would be outraged at the corporation. The potential damages were no longer in the realm of a standard settlement. They were now in the territory of a landmark verdict that could cripple the company. The cracks in Global Voyager's armor had become a catastrophic breach. The phone rang in Evelyn Reed's office. It was Harrison Croft, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a tone of weary defeat. "Miss Reed," he began, "I believe it's time we sat down and had a serious conversation about resolving this matter. Evelyn smiled. The legal battlefield was about to become a treaty negotiation, and she would be dictating the terms of surrender. The negotiation was set for a neutral location, a high-end conference center in a downtown Chicago hotel, a sterile space of polished wood and muted colors. It felt less like a prelude to a settlement and more like the staging ground for a surrender. On one side of the massive boardroom table sat the team from Global Voyager Airlines, their general counsel Harrison Croft, two senior partners from Sterling, Cromwell and Finch, and the airline's newly appointed CEO, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had been brought in to clean up the mess. Her face was a grim mask of corporate contrition. On the other side sat Evelyn Reed, flanked by Marcus and Amelia Henderson. They were not there as victims seeking a handout. They were there as the instruments of change. Their presence, a quiet, powerful testament to the injustice that had brought them all to this room. Chloe was not with them. They had shielded her from the legal battle, but her presence was felt a constant reminder of what was at stake. The opening offer from the airline was substantial, a figure in the high 7 digits. They laid it on the table, along with a standard non-disclosure agreement and a statement that admitted no wrongdoing, referring to the payment as a gesture to resolve a disputed claim. Evelyn let the offer hang in the air for a long moment before pushing the folder back across the table. "This isn't about the money, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice calm and even. "Though my clients will be compensated for the damage you have done, this is about accountability. That number is a starting point for the personal damages, but it doesn't even begin to address the systemic rot your own documents have exposed." The airline's lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not going to be a simple transaction. "First," Evelyn continued, "there will be a public apology, not a press release filled with weasel words, but a full-page ad in the nation's top 5 newspapers, and a video statement from you, Ms. Vance. It will be addressed to the Henderson family. It will specifically name them, and it will admit that the airline engaged in racial discrimination. It will state that your employees, following corporate policy, chose to protect a racist passenger over the dignity and rights of a black family. No equivocations." CEO Eleanor Vance paled slightly, but she nodded. The PR damage was already done. A direct, honest apology was their only path toward rebuilding public trust. "Second," Evelyn went on, "you will pay. Not just the personal settlement for the Hendersons, but a punitive sum that will make every airline in this country think twice before they ever let something like this happen again." She slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was a number, $25 million. A sharp intake of breath came from one of the corporate lawyers. Harrison Croft stared at the number, his face impassive. "That's an outrageous figure," one of the partners from the law firm sputtered. "Is it?" Amelia spoke for the first time, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the legal posturing. "What is the price for having your child ask you why a man hated you both so much he couldn't even sit near you? What is the price for being treated like a criminal on a plane you paid thousands of dollars to be on? That number isn't for us. That number is the cost of doing business the way you do. It's the cost of your appeasement policy." The room fell silent. Her words, born of raw, authentic pain, were more powerful than any legal argument. "And we're not done," Evelyn said, taking control again. "The money is only part of it. We are demanding systemic, court-monitored changes." For the next 2 hours, Evelyn laid out a sweeping list of non-negotiable demands. Global Voyager would be required to completely overhaul its conflict resolution and anti-bias training programs. The new curriculum would be designed in partnership with a leading civil rights organization chosen by the Hendersons. Every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the CEO, would be required to complete it annually. The high-value customer policy that created a two-tiered system of service would be permanently abolished and explicitly forbidden. Furthermore, the airline would have to implement a new transparent system for reporting and tracking complaints of discrimination, with the data being made available to an independent auditor for 5 years. Finally, a significant portion of the settlement, $5 million, would be used to establish a charitable foundation administered by the Hendersons, dedicated to funding legal aid for victims of travel-related discrimination. It was a complete and total capitulation. The airline would not just be paying for their transgression. They would be forced to fundamentally change the culture that had allowed it to happen. They would be made an example of. The airline's team asked for a recess. They filed out of the room, leaving the Hendersons and Evelyn alone. Marcus reached across the table and took Amelia's hand. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. "You've given us our voice." "Back," he said simply. An hour later, the airline's team returned. Eleanor Vance looked exhausted, but her expression was one of resolve. They had spent the hour on the phone with their board of directors, laying out the reality of their situation. A protracted public trial with the whistleblower's evidence would be corporate suicide. A jury verdict could be exponentially higher, and the court could impose even harsher sanctions. This settlement, as painful as it was their only way out. "We agree," Vance said, her voice strained. "We agree to all your terms." The signing of the settlement agreement was a somber, formal affair. The transfer of the funds was arranged, the public apology was drafted, and the framework for the systemic changes was put into motion. As they left the conference center and stepped out into the crisp Chicago air, a sense of profound relief washed over Marcus and Amelia. It wasn't a celebration. The scars of the incident would remain. But it was a victory. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that their dignity was not negotiable, that their rights mattered. Judgment Day had not come in a courtroom with a judge and jury, but in a quiet conference room where a corporation was brought to its knees, forced to atone for its sins. Not just with money, but with meaningful, lasting change. For the Hendersons, it was the end of a painful chapter. For Global Voyager Airlines, it was the beginning of a long, arduous, and very public reckoning. While Global Voyager Airlines embarked on its painful and public path to redemption, Richard Harrington believed he had weathered the storm. He was, after all, insulated by a fortress of wealth and privilege. The lawsuit had been against the airline, not him personally. His name had been dragged through the mud, certainly, and the leaked deposition video was a source of profound embarrassment, but he was convinced it would all blow over. The news cycle moves on, he told himself. People forget. In his world, money was a powerful solvent capable of dissolving any stain. He was wrong. The karma that was coming for Richard Harrington was not a fleeting storm. It was a slow-moving, inexorable glacier, and it was about to pulverize the foundations of his entire life. The fallout began in the circles where reputation is currency. The story of his behavior on the flight became a whispered cautionary tale at the exclusive country clubs and charity galas he frequented. Old acquaintances suddenly became too busy for lunch. His usual golf partners found other games. He received a polite but firm letter from the board of the Oakwood Greens Country Club, informing him that his membership was under review due to conduct unbecoming a member. A week later, it was revoked. His professional life began to crumble next. Harrington Capital's clients were not just individuals. They were pension funds, university endowments, and charitable foundations organizations with ethics committees and public images to protect. The CIO of a major state pension fund, which had over $500 million invested with Harrington, called an emergency meeting. They could not in good conscience continue to enrich a man whose blatant racism had been so publicly exposed. They pulled their entire investment. This first withdrawal created a panic, like a run on a bank. Other institutional investors followed suit, fearing both the reputational risk and the possibility that a man with such poor judgment in his personal life might be just as reckless with their money. Billions of dollars were pulled from his fund within a matter of weeks. His carefully constructed empire, built over 3 decades, was beginning to hemorrhage. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected quarter. A junior analyst at Harrington Capital, a young, ambitious man named Kevin, had long harbored suspicions about some of the firm's trading practices. He had seen too many coincidences, too many perfectly timed trades that seemed to front-run major market announcements. He was afraid to speak up, terrified of Harrington's notoriously volatile temper and the power he wielded. But watching the news, seeing the Henderson family's quiet dignity and Harrington's sneering arrogance, Kevin felt a surge of courage. He saw that the emperor had no clothes, that the powerful man he feared was at his core a bully and a fraud. Emboldened by the public backlash against his boss, Kevin anonymously compiled his evidence-trading logs, internal emails, and account statements, and sent a detailed package to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC, already aware of Harrington's high-profile public scandal, took the whistleblower's tip very seriously. They launched a full-scale investigation into Harrington Capital. What they uncovered was a massive systemic scheme of insider trading and market manipulation that went back years. Harrington hadn't just been a brilliant investor. He had been cheating using illegal inside information to guarantee his returns. His arrogance and sense of impunity were not limited to his interactions with fellow airline passengers. They were the bedrock of his entire business philosophy. One brisk autumn morning, as Richard Harrington was leaving his palatial Greenwich, Connecticut estate, 2 dark sedans with government plates blocked his driveway. Agents from the FBI, acting on a sealed indictment from the U.S. Attorney's Office, stepped out. They arrested him on the spot. The images of Richard Harrington, the Titan of Wall Street, being led away in handcuffs, his Savile Row suit rumpled his face, a mask of shocked disbelief, became the final ignominious chapter of his public downfall. His assets were frozen. His company was shuttered. His business partners deserted him, claiming they had been duped. He was facing decades in federal prison. The man who had refused to share an airplane cabin with a black family was about to share a cell block with actual criminals. His empire had not just crumbled. It had been utterly annihilated, a consequence of the rot that began with his own hateful heart. Months later, the Henderson family finally took their trip to Paris. They flew a different airline. As they sat in their business-class seats high above the Atlantic, Chloe looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. She was no longer the confused, crying child on the jet bridge. She was a young girl who had seen injustice and had watched her parents fight it with grace and strength. They used the first grant from their new foundation, the Henderson Initiative for Travel Equity, to fund a class action lawsuit on behalf of a group of disabled passengers who had been mistreated by another airline. Standing under the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower, Marcus put his arm around Amelia. "You know," he said softly, "in a way I'm glad it happened." Amelia looked at him surprised. "It reminded us that some things are worth fighting for," he continued. "It showed Chloe that you never ever let someone diminish you, and it showed the world that one family standing up for what's right can make a difference." They had faced down ugliness and had turned it into a force for good. They had not just won a settlement, they had won justice. And across the ocean in a cold, sterile prison cell, Richard Harrington had plenty of time to contemplate the true cost of a seat. It wasn't the price on the ticket. It was the price of a man's own character. And for his, he had paid with everything he had. The story of the Henderson family is a powerful real-life reminder that the fight against injustice is won not by silence, but by courage. It shows us that a single act of bigotry, amplified by corporate complicity, can ignite a movement for change. Dr. Marcus and Amelia Henderson didn't ask to be heroes. They were a family on vacation. But when confronted with blatant racism, they refused to be victims. They stood their ground, and with the help of a brilliant lawyer, they held a billion-dollar corporation accountable and triggered a chain of events that delivered inescapable karma to the man who wronged them. Their journey serves as a stark warning to any company that prioritizes profit over people and a profound inspiration for anyone who has ever been made to feel less than. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice and accountability. Join the conversation in the comments below.